I joined the military so young because I was running from something. And that's unfortunately why I believe a lot of us, when we get out, the suicide rates may be higher because there's a lot of unresolved issues.
My lived experience is coming home and thinking that the red carpet will be rolled out for you and there's nothing.
It finally got to the point where I reached out to my primary care provider and said, I need to talk to someone. I was connected with a social worker at the VA who really changed my life.
Welcome to Hope Starts With Us, a podcast by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. My name is Dan Gillison. I'm the CEO of NAMI. We started this podcast because we believe that hope starts with us. Hope starts with us talking about mental health. Hope starts with us making information accessible. Hope starts with us providing resources and practical advice. Hope starts with us sharing our stories. And hope starts with us breaking the stigma. If you or a loved one is struggling with a mental health condition and have been looking for hope, we made this podcast for you. Hope starts with all of us. Hope is a collective. We hope that each episode with each conversation brings you into that collective to know you are not alone. Today, I'm joined by U.S. Marine Corps veteran, NAMI's former Chief Strategy and Operations Officer, and NAMI Ambassador, Sherman Gillums Jr. Welcome, Sherman. And U.S. Army veteran and NAMI National Ambassador and Vice President of NAMI DeKalb, David Kendrick Jr. And U.S. Coast Guard veteran and Deputy Director of the National Legislative Service for Veterans of Foreign Wars, Tammy, Barlet. Good to meet you all. November is National Veteran and Military Families Month. And next week, we will be celebrating Veterans Day on November 11th, which is why today's podcast will be dedicated to talking about veteran mental health. At NAMI, we always make a point to acknowledge our military members, veterans, and their families, and to thank them for their service. As someone who grew up in a military family, with both my dad and brother serving as paratroopers in the United States Army, this is something that is personally and critically important to me. For many in the armed services, even after leaving a physical battlefield, they can continue to fight battles in their mind. Current data shows that the rate of PTSD is 15 times higher in veterans than civilians, and suicide rates of military service members and veterans are at an all-time high. Veterans disproportionately experience factors linked to suicide, including depression, substance use disorder, social isolation, and access to lethal means. The need for mental health services and breaking the mental health stigma is huge in military and veteran communities. That's why at NAMI, we've created free support groups and resources like NAMI Homefront. But more than anything here at NAMI, we believe in the power of people's lived experience, which is why we've invited Sherman, David, and Tammy here today. Can each tell us a little bit about your stories and experiences with mental health in the military? Were there particular stigmas that you faced? What was it like to have to transition back to civilian life? And how did your mental health change when you entered the military? And how did it change when you left the military? So David, we'll start with you. And David is from Rochester, New York, and is a United States Army veteran. And David, you can take it from there. I see the Buffalo Bills, so we'll just leave it at that.
All right, go Bills. So I joined the Army in 2005, and we deployed right away. I joined as a cavalry scout, 19 Delta, and we deployed right away to Iraq. And I got injured, shot by a sniper in both legs, June 17, 2007. And right away, my mental health was in shambles because my best friend, Eric Snell, was shot and killed by a sniper. And I dealt with a lot of survivor's guilt right off the bat, especially when I was laying in the hospital injured, couldn't do anything myself. And I spent 3 years in a WTU where I lost more friends. My unit, 361st Cavalry Regiment, deployed to Afghanistan, and I lost some very close friends in an ambush. And I dealt with even more survivor's guilt because I lost very close friends that had children, and I didn't. Then I made my transition back to Rochester, and I struggled so much because my family didn't know anything about the military. And I was the first person to ever join, so they didn't know exactly how to treat me. So I had access to everything, and I coped with alcohol. All I did was drink. I drank myself to sleep every day, and I tried to avoid as many people as possible because nobody knew about the military. My friends didn't know. My family didn't know anything about the military. And, you know, when you grow up in the inner city, you have access to alcohol and drugs and things like that. So that's how I coped. And it was very, very, very unhealthy for me. I didn't want to be around my sisters. And, I isolated myself on purpose because I wasn't healthy to be around. And I didn't want my sisters to see me, being drunk all the time. So it took a long time for me to get over that. Luckily, I got accepted into a program that helped veterans cope and deal with making that transition from the military to civilian life. And that's when I became David Kendrick, because I was so stuck in being Sergeant Kendrick, I didn't have an identity as a civilian. And I slowly gained that in this program called the Warrior Salute Program out of Webster, New York.
David, thank you very much. And let me back up a second and say something that I mentioned at the very opening, but we want to thank all of you for your service, the three of you, that not just for your time today, but your military service. So let me pause for a second and just make sure that you know that NAMI is so incredibly grateful and appreciative for your service. So I want to start there. And David, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned survivor's guilt. You also mentioned WTU. For our audience, what is WTU?
WTU is a Warrior Transition Unit. It's for those soldiers who were injured in combat or, just serving in the line of duty, and they have an option to transition back into the civilian world or do what we call a reclass and do something else in the military. And it's very interesting that you say that because the WTU that I was in, it was horrible. And it was so bad that we made the New York Times. There was a big investigation because there were so many soldiers dying in the barracks from drug overdoses. We had soldiers who were mixing their pills with alcohol. And it was a dark, dark place. And I found out this secret underbelly of the Army where a lot of injured soldiers go to, and they're hurting and they're, abusing pills and alcohol. And, it was a dark place. Very, very, very dark times back then.
Thank you for that overview, and so glad to see you on the other side of that. Want to come back to you in just a little bit, but I'd like to transition because where I want to come back to you, David, is just if you could share with the audience when we do come back to you is what was it like when you joined the Army in that community? And what was it like when all of a sudden you were no longer, you were separated from that? The other thing is that, we want to thank you for your service and also acknowledge you're a Purple Heart recipient. So I forgot to mention that, David. And sometimes our military people love to serve and they're so humble. I don't think you would mention that to the audience. So I want to make sure I do that. Tammy, I want to come to you next. From the standpoint of your service in the United States Coast Guard, and as you were deployed and what you've done, and you're also investing, as all three of you are, in your academic learning, and you have your MPH from George Washington University, and you're really dedicated in this space. So would you share some of your thinking on particular stigmas that you faced? What was it like to transition back to civilian life? And how did your mental health change from when you entered in terms of the excitement, the community, and then what was that transition like as you left that community?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for having me here today for this discussion. It's really important. So some of the stigma that I faced as a woman service member throughout my time at the Coast Guard kind of started at the very beginning. Leaving boot camp, I had a guaranteed geological area. And unfortunately, they didn't have a lot of female billets for the non-rate E2 that I was at that time. So I actually got duty stationed at a land base handing out basketballs to dependents. And I knew this is not what I wanted. And the Coast Guard had so much more to show me than just handing out basketballs and scraping bubble gum. So shortly after that, I decided to not wait the 3 years for corpsman school, but to go right away. And at that time it was called Raterman School. It was a very male-dominated rate in the Coast Guard. They later changed it to Operations Specialist. So if you're Navy, that word kind of rings a clearer bell. But it was a underway rate. And within a few months of training, I found myself on a Coast Guard ship sailing up to Alaska. So on board the ship, I got to go to Alaska 3 times, to Thailand. I served in the Persian Gulf in 1998, and then did a tour down to Mexico before I left after my 3 years. But being on the ship, women were a minority on board. We only had 2 enlisted berthing areas, and one of them was for like the senior enlisted. That was like a 4-rack, and then the other for the rest of the enlisted women on board. I will say we did have quite a number of women officers on board, so we did have that opportunity to mentor and mentee with them and see that upper leadership, but we still felt the challenges of sexual harassment and assault almost on a daily basis with our comrades. My next duty station was VTS Houston, which was kind of a different animal among itself, going from a ship and having everyone who was single and kind of like your family right on board to being at a duty station where you only saw those people when you were on duty, and then you kind of went home and you were on your own. So there I took the opportunity to volunteer a lot. And so I found myself working, volunteering at an emergency room or at a horse ranch, just trying to keep myself busy because I knew those 3 days off. If I didn't do so, I would have locked myself in my house and never came out. That, though, is where my depression really started. In 2001, I was involved in a serious accident to where in 2003, when I was going through my out physical, my command finally decided to go through a medical discharge board with me. So here I am, all ready to go out, already transitioned home. I'm looking forward to seeing my family and being around them again, only to be told that I have to extend my contract to get this board completed so that I have benefits going forward, not just from what the Coast Guard will offer, but from what the VA will offer. So I had to extend my contract 10 months. And I will say it was one of the darkest 10 months of my life. Continuing on with a job that I thought I was already done with and ready to go home. And that's actually when I first sat down and realized that I needed to connect with a therapist. But even going from home after that, this was 2003. So like trying to figure out how to navigate my disability benefits. Am I ready to go back to school? Now I'm being back in my family who I kind of felt on the outs for many years, and just being able to try to fit all that back in.
Yeah, Tammy, thank you so much. I want to come back to a couple of things as we go to Sherman. David mentioned darkest times. You mentioned darkest 10 months. You also mentioned navigating benefits. So I'm going to try and keep those notes and come back to you all for some of our veterans that are transitioning now about, how can we help them navigate their benefits. And not that we'll have all the answers, but give them hope. And then the darkest times in those darkest 10 to 12 months. How do we help that narrative? And I want to go to Sherman now, and Sherman, you're gonna hit me over the head when I say Semper Fi, but I got to do it because that's the reality of your service. And you went in at the age of 17, and I think, Sherman, you're also from Western New York, if I believe correctly, and have family there in Buffalo. But I don't think you would wear that Army branded Buffalo Bill thing. So, but is that correct? You're from upstate New York as well?
I am, sir.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, so you're kindred spirits in that, and also kindred spirits that you're both veterans, but I think that's where it stops because one's Army and one's Marines, and we have Coast Guard as well, Tammy. So now let me get into the questions. Were there particular stigmas that you faced? What was it like to have to transition back to civilian life? And how did your mental health change when you entered the military at 17? What was it like when you joined the military? And then how did it change when you left the military?
Thank you, Dan, for having us in this forum to talk about our service, which ultimately this is where we locate our commonness with each other. I can connect with Tammy. We've worked together for years on legislative wins, and David is a fellow Buffalonian. But I want to start the story a bit differently because most people start their military story from induction, but there's a whole lot of living you do before that also becomes implicated into what happens after you leave. I joined the military so young because I was running from something. I was running from a home where my mother had to have us on the run all the time because of domestic abuse. And I think one of the reasons I joined the Marine Corps is because I wanted to be a protector. I was too small back then to protect her, but I wanted to make a change in my life that would give me that empowerment to stop harm to others. And I would say that it's probably a good thing in the short run, but over the long run, I never got to deal with those things that drove me to seek a new identity. And even though putting on the uniform gave me a new identity, that identity isn't forever. And what you're left with is a person you were before you joined. And if you didn't reconcile all those issues you brought in, and for a lot of women, it's a history of abuse in many ways or neglect. And in my case, it was exposure to things that I never talked about with anybody. So I went into the Marine Corps on a mission with a chip on my shoulder. And that's not hard to carry around when you're a Marine, because that's how you train, that's how you interact. I eventually became a drill instructor, so I became responsible for training about 500 young men, 18 to 24-year-olds. And Dan, I'll tell you, most of them were running for something too. They were all looking for something, but they were running from something. And that's unfortunately why I believe a lot of us, when we get out, the suicide rates may be higher, because there's a lot of unresolved issues that, like David, after you get shot, or, if you, depending on how you get out, like Tammy, it leaves you empty, because that's all that filled you up as you suppressed all those other things. And for me, David talked about survival's guilt. Mine was in a different way. I was assigned to go to Afghanistan. I was a chief warrant officer. I'd done very well. I had become Camp Pendleton's martial arts program officer. So I was all about it, physically fit, had all the things going, looked like the poster board. Then I got in a car accident right before my unit deployed. So David, my survivor's guilt was that I couldn't even be there. Like, it's a weird way of saying it, but I think I would have rather have gotten shot than injured permanently in a car accident, because it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of how people receive you when you're injured that way. And as the Marines and soldiers were returning to San Diego, I was recovering from a spinal cord injury that put me in the vicinity of a lot of those young men. There weren't any women at that time, but a lot of young men, and they all didn't make it. I can tell you story after story of young people who died from brain aneurysms. David talked about the doldrums of being trapped in a warrior transition unit. You feel like a refugee in your own reality when you're in places where you don't have the autonomy to just walk out, and you got nowhere to go, even if you could walk out, because people don't understand you. So at that time, I began to formulate in my mind this sort of alter ego, this what if I had done that? What if I had not left the base that day? What if I had done things differently? Would I be laying here looking up at a wall, unable to move? So I spent 2 years hiding from reality, hiding from people. I didn't want to face people. This was around the time, and the young folks watching probably don't believe this, but the internet, social media didn't always exist. So this was around the time when social media was just picking up, around 2002, 2003. And I found this way to become a different person, because you could build a profile and be somebody different. And that was okay. So between the alcohol, between staying up all day, staying up all night and sleeping all day, and this new outlet, I found a way to get through life. But it only lasts for so long before the bottom falls out. And I got to a point where I knew it was self-destructive to stay on that path. I had gotten my retirement papers, and it just felt so final. Because before it was, you're being evaluated, it'll take some time, and people are still coming to visit you. And at some point, the visits taper off. You get the paperwork. Yeah, you're a veteran, but what does that mean? I don't want to wear the funny hats and all the stuff that those old guys do. So you're caught in like this sort of no person's land where you're just a nobody. And then you go to the VA and you deal with frustrations in some instances where you feel like a less than nobody, a second-class citizen, because people won't listen to you, or you're a social security number, and all the things that go along with fighting the system for benefits. And then I got to a point where I said, I'm going to go talk to somebody. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the doctor, I had a rapport with her because she would come by the unit when I was an inpatient, And I never thought I had any mental issues. That was for, other people. That wasn't for people like me. But as I began to talk about, again, before the military, as well as the military, and then what happened, and then my transition, she began to piece together a new identity for me that I didn't know was there. But I began to embrace that person as somebody who could take what happened to me. And that's what I did. I took what happened to me and turned it into what fuels my advocacy for other people. So I started to work with organizations like Paralyzed Veterans of America and AMVETS, NAMI eventually. And that began to piece together this sort of different form of heroism that I've been seeking in the uniform and never found it. But it was certainly more fulfilling this way because I could help people like David and Tammy and realize my dream that way. And so for me, I think I've lived it all for the purpose of sharing with other people who might be in the hole and benefit from the way I escaped it. I could show them the way out. And we looked at through that lens, then it becomes then there's a purpose behind everything that happened to you.
Sherman, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned something there about actually talking to someone, and that's a bridge, and that's very interesting in this discussion because it's a lot of times the armor that our military wear, it's very hard for them to take that off, even in civilian life. And that armor keeps them sometimes from doing what you did. So kudos to you for doing that and also sharing it with us. As we now talk a little bit more, I'd love to hear from you about resilience. What does resilience look like for each of you? Tammy, I know that from the standpoint of resilience for you, you write about your experiences and you joined something that the military offered. And what was that like? And what did the healing look like coming from that?
Resilience was actually the name of one of my storytelling opportunities that I had given a few years ago. And in there, I mentioned how in 2013, I had hit my mental rock bottom. I had another cousin die by suicide, and the first one was his brother who had passed when I was 16, and that cousin was actually active duty at the time. But the second cousin, and I was in the middle of a toxic marriage and hitting my career ceiling as I became a compounding pharmacy technician after the military. I just tried to figure out what was my next step because I knew it was only up from here, right? So I had not self-identified as a veteran since I left the military, although I would seek all my health care at VA. So it finally got to the point where I reached out to my primary care provider and said, I need to talk to someone. And I just need to move forward. So she connected me with a therapist who had gotten me on medication and gotten that squared away. But I felt there was still a need for something else. And I was connected with a social worker at the VA who really changed my life. After our first meeting, she saw in me what I had not seen in myself and made sure that I signed up for my vocational rehabilitation benefits that I still had and that I would pursue my education. And, she had assisted me through that process and even starting at the community college and understanding that I do have so much to learn and I do have so much to give out. She helped me through the process of leaving that toxic marriage and understanding that I can stand on my own 2 feet and go forward and do what I want to do. And it really wasn't until all that momentum started and I started believing in myself and understanding that I can do this. And I had the individuals to help support me and my sounding boards along the way, that I started getting involved in veteran organizations. One of them being Women Thriving and Empowerment, which is a women veteran writing group. Mm-hmm. And just being in a room with other women veterans, just pretty much like word vomit on a piece of paper for like 15 minutes. But then going around and verbalizing what we wrote, picking up those pieces of what speaks to us of the other writers and phrasing that into positive feedback, but then also learning how to be listeners, really empowered me forward. And knowing that I had a story and I needed to tell that story. And there were others willing to listen to that story. And there are others out there who are empowered by my story than to tell their story.
Thank you. And as we sit here, Tammy, it's three guys here, and Sherman also has a Tammy in his life who is a U.S. Army veteran who deployed to Afghanistan. I think it's Afghanistan for 12 months. So it's just another example of a noble soul and just an incredible veteran. I want to ask you though, Tammy, before I move to the guys. What was it like as a woman in the military?
You always had to be cautious because you wanted to make sure that you did your job as well as you could every day to 150%. Because you didn't want to become that slacker woman on the ship. You didn't also want to gather other labels that women service members were often seen as, those who were a little promiscuous on board ship or on board station. So you definitely had to, for me, it was keep my nose to the grindstone, move forward, try not to be involved in certain cliques that had that type of reputation, and just a lot of awareness of what I was doing and how others perceived me.
Sherman, is there anything that you'd like to share in terms of some of your Army veterans experience in your house? And also, by the way, Sherman, kudos to your daughter who's at the U.S. Naval Academy. So the Gillums family is very much in the military. So just so proud of her. But I want to come to you now as the spouse of a Army veteran. And is there anything that Tammy would say here, or you would want to say in terms of her matriculation through and navigating this space from a mental standpoint?
Yeah, I'll first say on resilience, it's that thing that's easy to have when you don't have a choice but to be resilient, right? So people get a lot of credit for being resilient. Well, guess what? Just about any one of us has to locate some level of resilience when things happen to us. So it's not we get tired sometimes of hearing how resilient we are. We want the pain to stop. We want the reason we have to be resilient to stop, so that's really the key. But for my wife who like this Tammy here, she didn't wear the whole veteran label. In many ways, she would basically downplay it because I think things that motivated her were a lot different than the things that motivated me. For me, it was the image. For her, it was finding a way to be self-sufficient and not even have to depend on the Army for that self-sufficiency or identity. So, and some women pay a price for that because they don't walk around saying I'm a veteran. So when they get out of their car, they've got, a plate on their car that says for veterans only. People might assume it's me because I'm rolling next to her. I am a veteran, but in many ways, she's a combat veteran and I'm not. So she rates those other things. And I'm oftentimes her advocate because she'll just, kind of walk away from it. And I'm the one saying, no, this isn't right. And I think that's the beauty of working with other veterans like Tammy Barlet, who's in that public space and other women can see her being a woman veteran, even though that's not the T-shirt that they're going to wear like some of the guys do. But it also informed how I would coach my daughter through her experience at the academy because she'll be a woman veteran someday. And I want her to be proud as well, but I also want to understand what's different about the experience for women. That's why I'm always listening really intently so that I can be an advocate and a champion for my sisters in arms.
Sherman, thank you very much, and really appreciate that. David, your thinking on any thing that you would like to share in terms of your healing? I know you've written a book about your experience and some other things. So we just talked about writing. So I wanted to ask you what has your healing looked like? And anything else you want to share? Let me mention here to all three of the veterans, anything you want to share, this is your platform, your voice, and I'm just a conduit.
Yeah. And let me talk about my Tammy for a little bit. Mrs. Tammy Haley Adams, my mom. During the summer of 2010, when I got out of the Army, I had a suicide attempt. I drove myself to the hospital and I said, save me if you can. And when I woke up, the first person I saw was my mom. And just to look in her eyes, I said, man, I can't do this to my mom. And I wanted to make sure, and it's my life's mission to make sure that I prevent as many moms as possible in the future from having that feeling or burying their veteran son or daughter. Because back in 2010, the number was up to 20 veterans a day dying from suicide. I think it's down to 17 now, but I want to get that number down to 0. That's why I speak professionally now, because I know what veterans go through because I've been through it. You know, my speech title, Lived Experience. My lived experience is coming home and thinking that the red carpet would be rolled out for you and there's nothing. There's no jobs for you. There's no family members that appreciate you. There's nothing there. So I speak professionally because I know what veterans have gone through, and I try to prevent as many veteran suicides as I can. I've been blessed with the gift of the gift of gab, speaking professionally, and it's not always about the paycheck. It's about the message and getting in front of people, and it helps me as well because my PTSD was so severe because when you get shot by a sniper, I still to this day don't know who did it. I can't put a face on a person who shot me. And then the person who shot and killed my best friend was shot by a sniper as well. So just getting in front of people, getting in front of these larger audiences. And as a speaker, you want the large audiences, the big crowds. But for me, my PTSD was telling me that the sniper may be in the audience and he may shoot you again. Knowing that the reality of that happening was slim to none. But at the same time, I couldn't let that fear conquer me. And I had to overcome that. And I overcome it every time I'm on stage because being vulnerable, not telling my story, but for me, it's being an easy target for my sniper to come and shoot me again. Because Sherman, he said he had scenarios in his head. My scenario was and still is that the sniper didn't shoot to kill me. He shot to wound so that he can come on later on in my life when things are going great and then finish the job. So the bigger my audiences get, the more speaking requests I get, the sniper just sitting there waiting, biding his time until I reach the level that I want to reach and then finish the job. So every time I get on stage, it's therapeutic for me in more ways than one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So now I want to come to Sherman and to each of you. And the question I want to ask you is, as you reflect back to how you've navigated this and those darkest times and darkest 10 months, if you could help another veteran with that navigation and those dark times, what would you share with them? And Sherman, we've been coming to you last. I'll come to you first.
I think the first thing we do is we share our stories about being in the hole. They become a chapter in somebody else's survival guide, right? They see how you got out of it. They know you know what they're talking about. You don't have to explain a whole lot. It's like they're looking in a mirror. The only difference is I made it out and they didn't. So when I encounter a veteran who is newly paralyzed, it's an opportunity for me to revisit what it was like to be in a dark place and feel my way around the darkness and let them know that it was okay to be the person you had to be. And it's okay to forgive that person you had to be when you were in that dark space. It's okay because not a single person who went through what you're going through got through it pretty. It gets ugly. You get through it the ugly way. And when you're a military person, they teach you certain ways to survive that are ugly. And you have to locate some of that to get through the non-military things, like being desensitized and, being too tough to let your emotions show. But at some point you get revealed, you get exposed, I should say, as a human being, and that's okay. So I think having people okay with the ugly side of recovery is the one thing I try to get to very quickly so that we can move to the parts where they see me and think I got it all figured out. I want them to know, no, it took a lot of crawling over broken glass to get here, but I can show you how I did that, and maybe it'll provide you with a pathway to do the same.
Thank you, Sherman, and I want to also thank you because I asked you personally to reach out to a military person, a Navy young man, and help him in his darkest moments. And you really did help him at that moment in time that he needed help more than ever. And it's help that I couldn't have provided because, as we talk about at NAMI, peer to peer, he could relate to you because you were his peer. So I want to thank you for doing that because your plate was full, but you said, I'll do it. And you've helped that young man so very much. Tammy, sometimes we find healing in untraditional places. I actually recall reading the 2018 Washington Post article where you talk about how you began attending writing workshops through a program called Veterans Voices and ended up finding a lot of healing through writing about your experiences. And I wanted to, you mentioned it earlier, but I want to come back to it for just a second from the standpoint of healing in non-traditional places. And you also mentioned, and what I love about what you both mentioned was a social worker, and then you went to see someone, Sherman. So you both talked to somebody. But may I come back to the healing in untraditional places? And is there anything you could add in terms of the veterans' voices and the healing in untraditional places for our veterans that are listening?
Yeah, and I'm still finding avenues to heal through. Healing in a non-traditional or unconventional space can be a multiple of things. It could be journaling. It could be storytelling. I often say it can be easy as improv. Because when you're improving, you're just thinking in that moment and you're being in that moment. And you're really focused and listening to the conversation that's going on stage. I've also done non-conventional hearing through adaptive sports. So my service-connected injury was a compound tibia fracture. And I thought my active life, my outdoor life was done. But being involved in adaptive sports, I fell in love with kayaking to the point where now I own 5. And I live very close to a water access. I've done rafting and canoeing down the Everglades. But that also brought me into other sports like powerlifting, and showing myself that I can do so much more even with my injury, and just a stress reliever, working out, bringing out those endorphins and going through the schedule of a workout, or just having that goal, that I'm going to lift 210 before like the end of 6 months. Just having that goal and working towards it will motivate you and continue on. And so for me, it's a little bit of everything helps along the way. And also what I find helpful is to involve my support system in those activities. So I'm not one to go hiking by myself or biking by myself, but I'll invite another veteran friend along, or maybe my sister, and just trying to spend that time with them, talking and listening is really important and therapeutic for me.
Thank you. That last point there, support systems. How important are support systems? David, let me come to you and just ask you about support systems. Do you have a support system now? And by the way, thank you for your work at NAMI. And would you just take a moment as you talk about support systems, tell us about your role at NAMI there in Georgia. What is your role?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Down here in what we call the A-Town, Atlanta, I serve as the co-president of NAMI DeKalb. And what we do, we provide free services and programs to people. I am certified in NAMI Homefront as an instructor. We just had our annual walk down here at the Georgia State Capitol, raised a lot of money for mental health down here. And I proudly serve this community because it's a community that I love. We get a lot of help from NAMI Georgia. Shout out to Mrs. April over there at NAMI Georgia, and our Kim Jones, who's over NAMI Georgia. But so sometimes we'll get people who just need some help and they don't know where to turn. And so they'll reach out to NAMI Georgia. And because we've developed the reputation that we have, some of the requests come to us, and April, our affiliates relations manager, she'll say, hey, David, can you help this person out? And even if we can't help you, I have resources that I know may be able to help them. You know, they may need something that we can't provide or we don't provide. But the great thing about being out in the community and being out in front and people knowing who I am through me building my reputation is being a trusted affiliate. And that's what NAMI is all about, is having that trust. And I've built my reputation enough where people reach out to me directly sometime via email and say, hey, I need some help, or we think NAMI DeKalb will be great for this. So that's the support system that we provide for the community. And to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier, when you are down in your deepest, darkest moments as a veteran, that's when your circle weighs the most in your life. And I didn't have the proper circle. And that's where I learned where my mistakes were. You need friends in your life who don't look like you, don't have the same things that you have in interest. You know, for me, I may need to be friends with a Kansas City Chief fan, God forbid. But, you know, it's having those people in your circle that care about your well-being. Because when I was going through it, all of my friends, all we did was get drunk together, because that's the only way we knew how to heal. Hey, man, I got a couple of Vicodin and your legs hurt. Here, just take these Vicodin and take this and have a couple shots and you'll feel fine. You can't go through recovery with people who are also in recovery and they have bad coping methods, because you're going to fall deeper and deeper and deeper down in whatever challenges you're facing. And that's what I did. And you may need that friend who you may not have much in common with, but instead of drinking together, you may go to the gym, like Tammy said, or you may go kayaking, or, you know, you just may get together and do something as simple as watch football with no alcohol involved. So it's great to have a circle and have people that you can trust with your mental health as well.
You know, and you said something there, David. You said a tremendous amount. You said, look at that circle and that support system, and make sure you look at what is it made up of. And if they're over here, that's not necessarily going to get you where you want to go. So I think that's incredibly. Sherman, tell us about support system. Then I want to come to all three of you and ask you about your insights about the mental health field at large and the reach that we need to have for veterans. So support system, Sherman, your thinking.
I think David nailed it. Tammy did as well. You have to find people that are on the same mission as you, and it can't be being stuck where you are. It's got to be something more than being satisfied with your current condition because other people are willing to soak in it with you. Eventually, they're gonna fall away, and they always do. I mean, even though veterans are tight in uniform, a lot of them get caught up with their own circumstances. Life moves on, and you're left alone if you didn't invest in a circle that's going to be productive and healthy for you. So I can only echo what David and Tammy have said about finding new pursuits, different things that you're going to try, different people that you may not think you connect with. But the one thing we're bound by is our humanity, and maybe hearing a different way or a different approach to how somebody dealt with hardship that's not the same way that you and your circle deals with it. You might learn something new about yourself that you didn't know was there. So I'll leave it short and brief at that because I think they said it all.
Yeah, thank you, Sherman. So I want to ask you, as mental health advocates, both civilian population at large, and what can we do better in supporting veterans?
Don't fetishize military service. When you fetishize military service, it feels empty. It feels hollow when you hear people say things like, thank you for your service. If you want to serve me, go volunteer at a veteran hospital. Thank me that way. Or just don't make it hard for me. If I'm on an airplane and I have a post-traumatic stress episode, or, generally people do. People are generally good. I encounter strangers all the time who are always willing to help. They see I'm a veteran. They're willing to buy me a beer or a glass of wine. But then I look at how some of the legislation moves through that hurts veterans when it's not passed, and these people are elected by other people who think about their own interests. Veterans aren't a lobby group. We don't go in with a political party or anything. We just want to ensure our brothers and sisters are treated well, and people need to own that. They need to own what it means to be a taxpayer and support veteran services at their expense, at their taxpayer dollar, because this freedom you have was not free and it can't be assumed. And there are places around the world that know this firsthand. And because we lived under this blanket of freedom before 9/11, we assumed that, we didn't even need veterans in some cases before then. And then after that happened, the country is stuck in post-traumatic stress, and its veterans are the only thing that stand between them and that happening again. And these two people right here were part of that wall that was put up, and we turn the keys over to other people who are now part of that wall. So I think if we continue to elevate veteran service, you'll have young people who want to join. If you continue to treat veterans as second-class citizens by not properly funding what they need, people aren't going to be willing to join. They're not going to be willing to put their lives on the line. Somebody else will take care of it. So I think we need to think about it from that perspective whenever we talk about the problems that veterans become when they get out and they have problems like alcoholism or suicide. It's a bigger issue. It's a national security issue in many ways.
Hey, Sherman, thank you very much. Tammy, same question in terms of the mental health field at large and the as an advocate, what can the civilian population do better in supporting veterans? And thank you, Sherman. I really like what you said about the country being in post-traumatic stress after 9/11. So, Tammy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I echo exactly what Sherman said. Right now we're in a mental health profession crisis, not just through the VA, but also in the civilian sector. And those in the civilian sector can still help out veterans. VA has a great program called the Community Care Network, where those community providers can still help those veterans, or even just the provider asking that individual in front of them if they served can bring so many resources and education and just the conversation and awareness of what their patient has gone through. I also want to mention, the average citizen can help in community projects, link up with other veteran service organizations that may be doing a community project at the elementary school down your street, or they may be filling backpacks or a food pantry. There you're shoulder to shoulder with us. You're carrying on conversations. You're listening to our stories. You're telling us about you and your stories of maybe you had a family member that served. So being more engaging and willing to just have that moment to be present and listen is so valuable. And I just want a quick tidbit back to what David had mentioned about support systems and those friendships that are toxic. For me, I had to weed out my support system. I had to understand those individuals who were toxic and bringing me down. And then I had to mourn the relationship that was no longer there. And I had to take those extra steps instead of just cutting them out of my life.
Wow, that's profound. And I think that that's something that a lot of our veterans can relate to. Before we move on, Tammy, you mentioned something earlier, and I meant to come back to it, where you had not self-identified as a veteran. And where I'm going with that is that, there may be two stigmas, the stigmas of mental health and the stigma of saying I am a veteran. I know that many of our returning military from Vietnam, the stigma, they would not disclose they were veterans. You mentioned you had not self-identified.
Well, it was a little bit of being the Coast Guard too. Often when people hear that I'm in the Coast Guard, they think I just served stateside, and they see, the Coast Guard does a lot of search and rescue, and it's not too much like a national security thing outside beyond the coastline. So it was always I get the nicknames, puddle pirates, or you really didn't serve in the military, their homeland security. So that's one of the reasons I kind of shine away. Two is I don't look like what individuals would see as a veteran. So if I would stand up, it kind of at that point in my life would be, I feel I would get looked or I would get judged. So it took a while, and definitely through the work I did with myself in 2013 and going forward and connecting myself with other veterans, I just felt empowered and embraced. And I just went on this upward trajectory that now it's like one of the first things you get my name and you get that I was an 8-year Coast Guard veteran. I am so proud of the service I did now. And, it was a really big part of my life. Like Sherman, I went in right after high school. It was just a stepping stone in my life, but I'm now so proud of it. Often, previous to my college experience, it was at the bottom of my resume. It was almost just like a skill.
Wow.
If somebody had told me, push that up, people will read about that and inquire about it. And they're also going to learn about the leadership skills, the attention to detail skills that we gained in the military. And that would be something that they might be looking for in their organization.
Thank you, Tammy. It comes down to peer respect and peer acknowledgement. So I appreciate you, and peer pressure. So I appreciate it. And I hope the peer acknowledgement has gotten better over the 8 years for sure, and the peer respect. It's wonderful to hear where you are now in that acknowledgement. So kudos to you. And David, I want to come to you and get your thoughts on how can mental health advocates and the civilian population at large do better at supporting our veterans?
Yeah, I think it's putting the veteran in the best position possible to help themselves and their families. A reason I joined the Army, to get out of high school or to get out of Rochester, I didn't have the best grades, but now I have my master's degree, and that's something that I never thought I would have. So there's nothing, literally, I don't think anything that a veteran can't do. If you ask anybody that served in the Army or the Coast Guard and Marines, we never do just what our job description is. You always got to do something else, whether it's being a medic or a doctor or a therapist. We're like, we have these knives called a Gerber, so they have a screwdriver, a can opener, a knife, or a measuring tool. We're very versatile. So I think that putting the veterans, especially people that served and want to share their experience, kind of fast tracking them on some of these programs. I'm currently trying to become a certified peer specialist, but there's a long waiting list, and then there's a lot of competition, things like that. And, my experience, I want to help a specific demographic, veterans, but there's some processes and paperwork and things you have to go through in order to get accepted into the class. I think just realizing that, especially when we have still 17 veterans a day passing away from suicide, realizing that there's veterans out there that want to help, they're in the community, and giving them the resources and sometimes fast tracking them so they can hit the ground running and start helping people, start helping veterans. Because I'm certified in home front, trying to do what I can with people in DeKalb County, but I want to help more than the people in DeKalb County. I want to help people all throughout the state of Georgia. So creating new positions, new skill sets, new jobs, and helping and getting those veterans out there to help the people that need it the most, the people that helped us, that served the country, that have experiences like I do, like getting shot by a sniper. I can speak the language to other veterans who served on the front lines, who are injured, and who don't feel like there's any hope out there. I've been there. So it's just, if you're listening to this right now and you're a CEO of any company or you're HR, you have the willpower and the ability to hire people, hire a disabled veteran, hire a combat veteran, hire a veteran that speaks the language and can help other people who are going through it.
And thank you, David. The world can be a difficult place, and sometimes it can be hard to hold on to hope. That's why each week we dedicate the last couple of minutes of our podcast to a special section called Hold On to Hope. Sherman, Tammy, and David, can you tell us what helps you hold on to hope? And for any veterans out there who may be listening and struggling to hold on to hope right now, what advice do you have for them?
Well, thank you, Dan. I live by the philosophy that hope and despair are two pathways to the same destination, where your conscience whispers, make a choice. And what you choose, you still got to go through hardship. You still have to go through all the things that are required of us as human beings. But you do have a choice to locate your purpose in that hardship and adversity. And hope is the driver that will get you to that point of self-actualization if you give it a chance. Don't give up on yourself.
As a Calf Scout, we say, when you're going through hell, just keep going. You'll come out on the other side. I've been there. I recently wrote a blog, called the foggy PTSD brain, where everything seems like you're in a fog. And you can reach out to other veterans who've been there, who've come out on the other side, who've went through that forest of not knowing who they are, not knowing who they are without the military, because that was me. I had no identity. I was Army, hua, 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 all day, 19 Delta Calf Scout, Buffalo Soldier, all day. That was me. Didn't even know how to be David Kendrick. But it gets better. It gets better. And if you look at the panel today, nobody looks like what they've been through. Nobody looks like that. So it gets better. It gets better. When you're going through hell, just keep on going. And if you need help, reach out to me. Visit me, www.dkendrickjr.com. I'm always willing to listen.
Thank you, David. Tammy, the same thing. What would you say to the listeners who feel like giving up? And how can someone who is feeling hopeless feel hopeful?
So I have 3 little stars above my front door frame that I see every time I walk out of that front door. And they say, live, laugh, and inspire. So I attempt to live my every day to the fullest. And every opportunity, every corny joke, I laugh, because that will just incite my hormones and make me feel better inside. And then inspire others. Like David said, that there is a time and a forward thought that you will be out of the darkness. And there is someone there in your life who is ready to listen to you. Just keep calling, keep reaching out until you find that person. And if you run out of people, I'm a person that you can reach out to. It's Barlet with 1 T. But also, mentioned earlier about community. Have those individuals in the community be prepared to be that person to help support the others who are in their time of need.
Thank you. And live, laugh, and inspire. Thank you very much. That's profound. And all of you have made some profound things that you've offered. As I get ready to do the wrap up, is there any closing thought you'd like to have for the audience before I do the wrap up? Because this is peer to peer, and this is so wonderful to have you giving your time to speak to us and to share your experiences with other veterans. Any thoughts that you'd like to make sure you transfer to this audience?
I guess I'll just say, don't ever stop the heart that got you this far.
All you have to do is get through today, because tomorrow's another day. So all you have to do is get through today. Tomorrow will be there.
Yes. After 20 years, the war is done. So your job fighting on the front lines, it's over. Now it's time for a turn. We all know and love in the military, and that's R&R. Get some rest and relaxation for your body, and most importantly, your brain.
Wow. You know what? You've each dropped the virtual mic. So I will close with this. This has been Hope Starts With Us, a podcast by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. If you are looking for mental health resources, you are not alone. To connect with the NAMI HelpLine and find local resources, visit nami.org/help. Text HelpLine to 62640 or dial 800-950-6264 or NAMI. If you are experiencing an immediate suicide, substance use, or mental health crisis, please call or text 988 to speak with a trained support specialist or visit 988lifeline.org. To visit the Veterans Crisis Line, dial 988 and then press 1, or text 838-255 or go to veteranscrisisline.net to use the online chat. Finally, NAMI Homefront, free health, wellness, and recovery resources for veterans, service members, and their families is available at homefrontresources.nami.org. This is fantastic, and we just appreciate you all so much. And David just showed his Homefront Challenge coin. So we appreciate you all so very much. And this is Dan Gillison, the CEO of NAMI, and we're just so honored and humbled to speak with these veterans on today. Thank you so much.